So that's the W's out of the way, the various integers and aliases available to you there. There is another class of write concern that can be used, and this is related to persistence to disk. Right? So the W write concerns were all about writing in memory, but you can, if you so wish, set a write concern that gives you a guarantee that something has actually made it to disk. And what does that look like? Well, you've got two basic options. You have one which is called jtrue, and you have fsync true. And what do these mean? Well, jtrue means journal true. In other words, once something has actually been written to the journal, that is considered successful. Fsync true is considered something successful when it's actually been flushed to disk. Now, with journaling enabled, which you should have in all production systems, fsync true is the same as jtrue. Because once something has hit the journal, it is actually on disk, and there's very good reasons for this. These are orders of magnitude different in terms of the times that they're actually going to take. So journaling, the journal will sync to disk every 100 milliseconds by default. That can be adjusted. Whereas an fsync happens only every 60 seconds. So that's a massive difference in terms of how long you're going to wait for something to actually be acknowledged. And of course, you could write something to a MongoD right before the fsync flush would happen, in which case that would be quite a quick operation. But then again, you could write it right after an fsync flush happens and be waiting 59 seconds for a subsequent acknowledgement. So not something people are generally going to want to do and wait around for in a database. 100 milliseconds is much more reasonable. And hence, as a shortcut, when you have journaling enabled, fsync true becomes jtrue. One other little note, and if anyone takes a look at the code here for the jtrue acknowledgement, you'll notice that if there is a write pending, so if there's a jtrue write pending, the sync for the journal is reduced. In fact, what happens is this 100 milliseconds will be divided by 3. So it is still potentially up to a maximum of 100 milliseconds. If there was no pending write and you did a jtrue, you may still be waiting 100 milliseconds, but we do try to make things a little bit faster. If you're waiting for this jtrue acknowledgement that MongoD realizes that that is what is happening, it will divide this number by 3 and attempt to sync in 30 milliseconds or 33.3 milliseconds as opposed to 100 milliseconds. So just a quick note there, if you see jtrue writes being returned in less than 100 milliseconds, that's the most likely reason why. So what does a jtrue acknowledged write look like visually in the same way we've been doing the others? Okay, so here we have our jtrue write concern done visually. Again, we'll just go back to the simple setup of a driver in a MongoD. So we get the write coming in from the driver to the MongoD and followed by get last error call, this time with jtrue as the option. This will get applied in memory, first of all, and in W1, this would be the trigger for the acknowledgement going back to the driver and saying, that the write was successful. However, in this case, we have to wait for an extra step, which is the write to the journal. Now, these two things are not necessarily equivalent, or indeed this shorter than this one. In all likelihood, this application in memory is going to be very, very short, but just the need to actually space things out for diagrammatical purposes means that I've made them look roughly equivalent, but that's usually not the case. This application memory will usually be the order of nanoseconds for a small in-place update, for example. Whereas the write to journal is taking milliseconds. But for illustrative purposes, we're not going to worry too much about that. So the application memory happens, then we wait for the write to the journal. This is the jtrue write concern coming into effect. Now, if there's multiple of these pending, this might be as little as 30 milliseconds. Remember our divide by 3 rule over here. And then you get your GLE response. Hopefully a successful one, so you won't be getting an error here. So this should be pretty straightforward. So you can see how the added latency of saying I want this to be persisted to disk is going to impact here. And if for some reason you were not running with journaling enabled, which you should be, but if you were not and you used fsync true, then this green section here could take up to 60 seconds. So that would be an fsync true. But not a common implementation, not something that we're going to recommend people to use in general. So usually not going to be anything even remotely on the order of 60 seconds. So usually going to be somewhere between 30 and 100 milliseconds for a jtrue write. So there you go. That's jtrue explained visually.